And that was a pretty exciting session. We're out to try to continue that dialogue, but at a location on the planet where changes are very, very rapid. Some would ask, well, why the Arctic in this context? I would argue it's a microcosm, a place where change is very rapid, and it's a way in which we can learn by doing and apply out many of these ideas that we just concluded talking about in a region which may be a little more manageable, and yet we've got 8 of the major players in the Arctic countries who participate not only in the Arctic but in this larger arena. It really is a pleasure for me to introduce Ambassador Mark Brzezinski. He has recently returned to the United States from having been the ambassador to Sweden from the United States for about 4 or 5 years, starting in the early part of this decade. And he has played a number of roles in our government over the years, but now he sits at a very juncture of this Arctic arena as the executive director of a new enterprise that was formed, well, about a year ago, and he's joined us this past fall to lead an effort called the Arctic Executive Steering Committee, whose purview is very broad. It really looks at our Arctic in a whole range of things that nests the Arctic Council, but it does a number of other things and brings it together. So we're privileged to have him here. He sits in the White House in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, but what he really has is a committee made up of basically the leaders of our agencies and the leaders of the Office of the President in bringing our talents as a nation together and looking to the future. And he's going to tell us about what they're up to, and it's a real pleasure to have him join us. Mark, it's all yours.
Thank you.
I got to read a minute.
Exactly. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Bob Carell. One of the best pieces of advice I got when I started was to go meet and quickly Bob Carell, who has provided great wisdom when it comes to science, the Arctic, but also great clarity in terms of what works. Because when it comes to the challenge at hand, the scale and the extensiveness of what is needed, the expense, what works is really important. And Bob has been an incredible source of guidance and information. I can tell you that I was in Alaska the week before last. It was warmer there than it is here. At the time, there was less snow there than there was here. And so that's the kind of weird dissonance of the day. I am so pleased and honored and want to thank the National Academy of Sciences. I want to thank Pavel, my friend, for inviting me to address this important conference. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the year of the Arctic science. And I hope when this group meets in 2017, I really hope that we can look back on 2016 as a year that was catalytic in terms of the role of science in informing a responsible way forward. The timing of this event could not be better. On January 21st, as Bob indicated, we celebrated the first anniversary of the establishment of this brand new government platform called the Arctic Executive Steering Committee by President Obama at the White House. It's a unique government platform. It's both domestic and international. It's meant to catalyze a whole of government approach to the future of the Arctic, which is a strategic space that, like space, like cyberspace, the whole world has an interest in it. Every major department is involved. Julie Gurley is up here from the State Department, my great inspiration and collaborator. We have Simon Stevenson over there from the National Science Foundation, and there are more than 25 federal agencies and departments involved. Alaskans, importantly, are very involved. Fran Ulmer, Tommy Boudreau, Raina Thiel, Beth Kurtula, others, leaders from Alaska, to give us local competence in terms of the global approach that we are taking on the future of the Arctic. And the urgency is clear. President Obama, on his visit to Alaska last fall, had this to say: make no mistake, the looming crisis in Alaska's Arctic is a tangible preview of the looming crisis of the global condition. And so it's not too early to assess what work we've done so far and what we have teed up for 2016. I brought a cover of the budget, your federal budget that was rolled out on Tuesday of this week, the national budget proposal, which has the cover of Mount Denali on the cover of the national budget, which to me conveyed it symbolizes the importance of the Arctic and Alaska as a tangible national imperative to get right. And it's not just visuals like Mount Denali, although that's important, but it's the broad discretionary funding that was proposed pertaining to innovation and infrastructure, and the Denali Commission's new role pertaining to coastal climate resilience, and really making that a national imperative with $400 million out of $2 billion proposed specifically for the unique circumstances of Alaska. It's about icebreakers and the progress that we're making on that now. The Arctic is so many things. It is so many different challenges and opportunities. It does not exist in a vacuum. As the President indicated, it is an augury, it is a foreshadow, and it is really a challenge for us to come together around the Arctic to build a shared understanding and launch an effective global approach. For us, the Arctic is a beacon in certain ways, and this moment is an important beginning. Communicating this challenge is urgent. The Arctic is still an esoteric and somewhat extraneous topic, for lack of a better word, and it hasn't captured yet the national mindset. Why is the Arctic important? Because what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. The Arctic serves as a refrigerator for the planet. It's warming 2 times the average rate of the rest of the world. Of course, that's important for the 4 million residents of the Arctic, for those dependent on subsistence, for those impacted by coastal erosion, for those who will be forced into relocation, but it impacts the rest of the planet. A key message from credible, highly legitimate communicators as scientists is that it affects you in your own backyard. That is the way we're going to develop an urgency that can result in the right answer to decision questions. The loss of Arctic snow and ice results in rising sea levels, a higher occurrence of extreme weather events, altered weather patterns, of course, the positive feedback loop, which exacerbates the impacts of climate change. There is a direct interaction between what happens in the Arctic and what happens in the rest of the world. If we do not mitigate the impacts, it can result in collapsing of ecosystems, food and water shortages, large-scale migration. On the flip side, any legitimate action requires unprecedented levels of international cooperation and self-sacrifice. I have a lifelong interest in the Arctic, which I built on during my tenure as U.S. Ambassador to Sweden. I spent a lot of time up in Sweden's high north with the Sami people, listening and learning about the impacts of climate change on that particular culture. Listening and learning to how ticks, all Americans know about ticks which never had been seen before in Sweden's Arctic area, now all over the reindeer in Sweden's high north. The fact that the reindeer cannot smell the pasture through the winter snows because of the increasing ice layers, how that is impacting their society and the central organizing principle of their culture. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why the Arctic matters.
If this climate change keeps going at this rate, I'm pretty sure that the reindeer won't survive it.
Yeah.
It goes too fast right now. And without the reindeer, the whole Sami culture will disappear. And the world will be an indigenous people poorer.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's Nila Inga, a Sami leader in that part of Sweden above the Arctic Circle. His warning is one that we should heed, because if we don't get global warming under control and a clear plan on mitigation, our society is also in trouble. A starting point for developing a national policy on the Arctic is this: recognition that the Arctic is simultaneously a strategic challenge and a human challenge. There are all kinds of interplays here pertaining to the lands and waters impacted by climate change, dwindling fauna populations, decreased ice levels that open up new sea routes for passenger ships, and the increased need for cooperation among nations, among others. Through appreciation of the interconnected and interdependent nature of these different components, we can develop a multifaceted solution. In addition to that, U.S. priorities on the Arctic are diverse. They range from national defense and national security, sovereign rights. We saw Russia renew its claim on the Arctic this past week. Freedom of the high seas, maritime safety, energy, environmental stewardship. There's a number of different priorities in play when it comes to developing national policy. And when it comes to our national policy on the Arctic, the starting point that we have had going back to the early beginnings in the modern era is science, research, and exploration, as seen in the senior Senator Murkowski's Arctic Research and Policy Act way back in 1984, which of course created IARPC, which created the U.S. Arctic Research Commission, housed within the NSTC. That was further refined and developed in 2009 through policy directives on national security and homeland security, and in May 2013, the first ever United States national strategy for the Arctic was published, followed by an implementation plan in 2014, which took that strategy up to another level, because as you know, in our vertically integrated government, you have the vision of the president, you have the strategy, and you have the tactical implementation of that strategy. And if that tactical implementation truly isn't thoroughly and proactively and aggressively built out, it's often just words and not necessarily deeds. I'm pleased to report we're going to report out another implementation plan in a month's time in 2016 that is both a report of what we've been doing and a forward look to the future. Today, almost every federal agency with responsibilities in the Arctic has an Arctic strategy to specifically guide internal agency priorities. Very important is the development of the IARPC Science Plan 2013 to 2017 and related working groups established to coordinate science and to share information. In 2015, as I said earlier, the President promulgated this executive order to create the Arctic Executive Steering Committee. It has 4 goals. 1, setting priorities. Of all the many, many priorities we can have on the Arctic, what are going to be the main priorities? 2, very important for President Obama, evaluating progress on promises and commitments made. And I drive that forward every day. When the President went up to Alaska in September, he made 3 sets of announcements under which there were more than 40 promises. I broke them out line by line in a spreadsheet and monitor progress on each person responsible, agency responsible, timing and milestones to drive forward. And now we have EPA water and construction grants for sanitation and water in native villages. The USDA high energy cost grants, for example, specific deliverables that we need to deliver on. 3rd, greater coordination between stakeholders. As I said before, the Arctic is everything. It's native and tribal, state, local, the federal family, international. And last, to support our chairmanship of the Arctic Council. Dr. John Holdren, the President's science advisor, is the chair of the Arctic Executive Steering Committee, and Amy Pope is the vice chair. In terms of what we've done in the last year, I want to start on the President's visit in late August. Because why was that such an opportunity? In addition to the promises and the commitments, part of it is communicating the Arctic. Where the President goes, the eyes of the world goes. And for a week, we had the focus on the augury, the foreshadow of the Arctic as a preview to the global condition. That is important because still too few people are aware of the challenges and opportunities of the Arctic. Here the President is visiting Exit Glacier. How do you communicate the evidence of, how do you communicate climate change with clear evidence? There's no greater evidence than a formerly giant and huge glacier that's now tiny because it's melted. And where the President is standing there in the photo on the right is where the glacier was until recently, and now as you see it's melted quite a bit. There was a heavy emphasis on coastal erosion and the impact on the people of the Arctic, hence the designation of the Denali Commission as the lead coordinator for a federal approach to resilience and adaptation in the Arctic. There was also an emphasis on shipping and maritime, because clearly as the Arctic sea ice melts, it's like the building of the Panama and Suez Canal simultaneously in terms of new openings. Nothing is being built, but the increase in shipping will come. We need to be effectively aligned between our friends around the world, which means importers and exporters, and time is not on our side to do that. In addition, different kinds of ships will be coming through. This coming summer, the Crystal Serenity, a cruise tourist ship, $21,000 a ticket, sold out, will be going from Seward to New York with more than 1,000 passengers. With that kind of sales, you can expect more cruise ships on the way. Are we ready for it? Marine security and environmental stewardship requires infrastructure. That is why it was so important that President Obama announced in his budget proposal the steps to accelerate acquisition of a new Coast Guard icebreaker from 2020 to 2020 from 2022. The 2017 budget includes $150 million for design of our polar icebreaker, including completion of programmatic planning documents and design activities. And that accelerated request reflects the administration's strong commitment to obtain a new polar class icebreaker ASAP without compromising best practices. The President knows that we cannot go it alone in the Arctic. We are not preponderant in the Arctic area. That by acting alone and not with others, we only accelerate our failure. And so he has insisted that the U.S. must really work to strengthen international cooperation in the Arctic. The State Department has been incredible in this regard. They pulled together a truly historic, unexperienced by me, conference called Glacier in Anchorage in August, which was participated in by more than 20 foreign governments, foreign ministers from Korea, the Netherlands, not Arctic countries, but great shipping countries, for example, were there. And it really created a platform to come together on the Arctic. Why is that important? Because as we look to work with others on the Arctic, we need to be able to do a comparison of undertakings to see where we are compatible in terms of what we're doing in the Arctic and where things can be expanded jointly. The Glacier Conference was a very good example of that. Another good example of that is seen in the new Coast Guard Forum, where the 8 Arctic nations are leveraging collective efforts to foster safe, secure, and environmental responsible activity in the Arctic. A key piece of engagement is with the people who live in the Arctic, the most local of our populations as it pertains to the Arctic. The Arctic Executive Steering Committee is working with the Department of Health and Human Services to form a task force to ensure consultation and collaboration with Alaska Native tribes. We are working to advance the role of traditional knowledge in some of the management work that we're doing, and we're bringing young Alaskans through different internships and other ways into the fish and wildlife management process, land management process, and in other ways. An important challenge is mapping the Arctic. The NGA is incrementally releasing digital elevation maps, first of all of Alaska, and then of all of the Arctic, and that process is underway now. You can see with this map up here of Alaska's tabletop mountain, using the best data previously available, and then look with the new digital elevation maps, the clarity is much, much more detailed. That's what we're looking to put into the public domain so that we can collectively, as a nation and as a world, develop the most intelligent, responsible approach on the Arctic. Arctic observing and monitoring the impacts on fish and wildlife there is so unbelievably important. We are going to be absolutely driving forward to really link together the best international combinations when it comes to observing and monitoring, really looking to a particular platform that I'll talk about in a moment. But But note that when it comes to the biodiversity piece, we're looking to advance the international combinations on monitoring and observing. And that brings me to our path forward. We are underway with a lot of different lines of effort. Time is not on our side. International cooperation is going to be the only way that we succeed in this, and science is going to be the foundation of this. And that's why in the beginning I said, this is the year of the Arctic scientist. We need your help. And we count on your government to do all it can to create a platform to bring together Pan-Arctic science and Pan-Arctic data sharing. And so I'm here to tell you that in 2016, the White House will host the first ever Arctic Science Ministerial. There's never been a ministerial of science ministers. The Swedes held a ministerial of environment ministers, but there's never been a ministerial, so to speak, of science ministers, with the goal of legitimizing and advancing the best scientific combinations for the future of the Arctic. And we're keeping our view on the deliverables broad, not just on climate, but health, maritime, energy, and so forth. It's in its early stages of planning, but it's something that we are focused on because the president was clear when he came back from Alaska that he wants us to run through the tape in terms of his visit to the Arctic, that his visit was not the apex of high-level engagement with the Arctic, but the beginning of it, and he wants it to be substantive in terms of follow-through. And that platform, we hope, produces that kind of substantive combination. Thank you very much.
Wow.
Thank you, Bob.